The Legend of Zelda series is one of the most popular and highest rated video game series of all time. However, even with all of the perfect review scores, Nintendo hasn't always made the best decisions when it comes to their #1 adventure franchise. Sometimes Nintendo knocks it out of the park, as they did recently with Breath of the Wild. But other times, when it comes to certain games, spin-offs, marketing material, or other forms of media, Nintendo is more than happy to just ignore it and move on. While plenty exist, we have gathered together 10 of the things Nintendo wants you to forget about The Legend of Zelda. If you're a fan of videos like this, then subscribe, like, and comment below to let us know what games or videos you would like us to focus on in the future. Number 10. Twilight Princess was originally Wind Waker 2. Yes, we know Phantom Hourglass is technically Wind Waker 2, however, it wasn't the original Wind Waker 2. That existed long before. Nintendo was sure they had a success on their hands with the Wind Waker, and to an extent, they did. But although the game received great review scores and sold well, Western audiences hated the cartoony art style. So, Nintendo decided to completely change the cartoon style to the more realistic Twilight Princess art style we have now. The problem was, they were already far into development for a direct sequel, Wind Waker 2. This game would have kept some aspects of the sailing from the previous game, but would have mostly taken place on a huge piece of land. For the first time ever, we would have seen adult Toon Link and Toon Epona. What happened to everything? Well, the dungeons, locations, weapons, and everything else were reused in Twilight Princess. Some aspects even made their way to Phantom Hourglass, and others were scrapped, never to be seen again. The big takeaway here is that to this day, we still do not have an official Toon Epona or adult Toon Link. Number 9. Zelda Ura never released. A lot of confusion exists around Zelda Ura and Master Quest. For those who aren't familiar, Zelda Ura was a planned expansion of Ocarina of Time. It was essentially what we would call DLC today. In interviews, Miyamoto spoke about how the expansion would add new items, dungeons, side quests, villages, and more. It was meant to take full advantage of the extra memory and processing power of the N64's disk drive. However, once the disk drive began to fail, Nintendo canceled the expansion. Due to such high fan demand, Nintendo eventually released Ocarina of Time Master Quest, a version of Ocarina of Time that remixed the dungeons to add more of a challenge. In interviews, Miyamoto said that Master Quest was Zelda Ura. However, Master Quest only contained remixed dungeons, none of the extra side quests, villages, towns, NPCs, items, weapons, story, or new dungeons that were promised. Again, they were only remixed dungeons. In other interviews with Nintendo, it was implied that Zelda Ura, the full expansion, was actually complete, or at least very close. So the fact that Nintendo has a full expansion essentially complete and ready to go, but never released it or added to future releases such as Ocarina of Time 3D, is something they definitely don't want you to know, especially with Miyamoto's own conflicting statements on the game. It's not all bad though. Nintendo has stated that unused content from Ocarina of Time was carried over into future games, so we could have seen parts of those dungeons in Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, and other games. Who knows? In the same way Nintendo brought back and officially released the cancelled Star Fox 2, they could always release the complete version of Ocarina of Time. Number 8. The Tingle Games. No side character is hated as much as Tingle, especially to the Western audiences. However, in Japan, Tingle is by far one of the most popular characters from the entire franchise. Because of his popularity, Nintendo has produced 4 separate Tingle games and included him into several different official Zelda games and spin-offs. Even in the most recent Breath of the Wild, he had an entire island attributed to him. all 4 Tingle games would launch in Japan due to his overwhelming popularity, but because Nintendo, knowing how much the Western audiences hated him, they never bothered bringing them to America. What is so bad about this, you ask? Well, whether you hate Tingle or love him, Nintendo doesn't want you to focus on how they released 4 full-length games focused on Tingle instead of our typical hero Link. Even if it's just 2 original Legend of Zelda games, I'm sure most fans would prefer that over a handful of Tingle games. To make the situation a bit worse, some of these games even have references to official canon Zelda games. This is despite the fact that most believe the game to take place outside of the official timeline, which adds even more confusion to the already controversial timeline. Despite this, if you are a fan, you can still enjoy Freshly Pickled Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, Tingle's Balloon Fight DS, Too Much Tingle Pack, and Ripened Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love, all on the DS. Who knows, maybe a Tingle game will appear on the Switch. Number 7. Triforce Heroes wasn't originally on the timeline. When Triforce Heroes originally released, Nintendo stated that it was its own separate game. However, not even a week or so after its release, Nintendo contradicted their original statement by saying yes, Triforce Heroes does in fact take place in the official timeline. Not only that, but that it is a direct sequel to A Link Between Worlds and follows the adventures of the exact same Link from that game. When Nintendo doesn't even know if a game takes place in the timeline or not, it gets bad, especially when they end up trying to convince us that it is a direct sequel to one of the most popular Zelda games. This would be similar to them releasing Majora's Mask and telling us that it's its own game, then, a few weeks later, confirming that yes, it was indeed a sequel to Ocarina of Time. Number 6. The official timeline retcon. When the original timeline was revealed in Hyrule Historia, it had fans going crazy. For the first time ever, this was Nintendo definitely saying, yes, this is the canon official timeline, this is where every game is located and how they fit there. A few years later, Nintendo released another book, this time with an even newer retcon version of the timeline. What changed? Well, the most controversial is A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, and the Oracle series. Originally, it went A Link to the Past, the Oracle series, and ended with Link's Awakening, all of which focused on the exact same Link from one game to another. Now, the Oracle series takes place after Link's Awakening and follows the journey of an entirely new hero. Nintendo essentially created an entire new hero that never existed before. If before we would have a total of 8 different Links, now we have 9. If Nintendo doesn't even know which games go where on their timeline, how are the fans to know? How can Nintendo sell a book based on a timeline, then simply retcon it as they please? Number 5. Breath of the Wild doesn't have an official location in the timeline. Breath of the Wild finally released in March of 2017, and we still don't know where it takes place. What has Nintendo confirmed about its location? Well, Aonuma has given a few vague statements. 1. He says that it takes place at a time long after Ocarina of Time, in an era where Hyrule has had many battles with Ganon. 2. The story itself has nothing to do with the Wind Waker. And 3. Playing through the game, fans should be reminded a lot of Twilight Princess. The problem is, saying that the game takes place long after Ocarina of Time isn't much help, as Ocarina is the start of the 3 splits. Plus, the game has several references to past Zelda games. Depending on which language you are playing the game in, during a cutscene, Zelda references Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, and Twilight Princess. However, if you are not playing in English, you may hear Wind Waker or A Link to the Past be referenced by Zelda as well. How can a single game reference all major Zelda games and still have a concise place in the single timeline? Well, Nintendo has said that they essentially didn't care about the timeline or take it into account when making the game. They purposefully made it take place over 10,000 years in the future so they wouldn't have to fit it into a specific place. Number 4. Link's appearance in Captain N: The Game Master. Link made an appearance in Captain N, and that is all you need to know. It was a show from the late 80s and early 90s. Although the show still has a following to this day, it is still looked down upon for its negative portrayal of Link and Zelda. While it is cool to see your favorite character make an appearance in new media, it did not do the series any favors, though he was portrayed better than the official cartoon series. This older, more mature version of Link is not something Nintendo wants its fans to think of when it comes to the Zelda series. Number 3. Those awful 80s commercials.
It's The Legend of Zelda and it's really rad. Those creatures from Ganon are pretty bad.
Just like the TV shows and the CDI games, Nintendo did not know how to market their franchise to their audience, and it didn't serve them very well. Granted, Nintendo would rebound from its mistakes and make decent commercials around the late 90s and early 2000s. But then we had the Wii U, and
this happened!
Yeah, that wasn't good. It wasn't until the Switch that Nintendo finally clued in on how to make good commercials that would appeal not only to their audience, but to others as well. It just goes to show that Nintendo can make something bad into something good. Ugh, but those commercials though. Number 2. The cartoon. The Legend of Zelda cartoon. Only the best cartoon ever.
Well, excuse me, princess.
Yeah, okay, it's not the best cartoon ever, but it can't possibly qualify as the worst cartoon ever. There was just nothing Zelda about it. Yes, we did have Zelda, Link, and Ganon, but that was about it. The cartoon destroyed the idea of what Zelda really was, and made people think twice about giving Zelda their own movie. Although that Mario movie was bad and still happened, so maybe there is hope for a possible Zelda show or movie on Netflix, Amazon, or HBO. But still, that cartoon is something Nintendo really wants us to forget. Well, good luck with that. Number 1. The CDI games.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
My boy, this piece is what all true warriors strive for.
What is there to say about the CDI games that hasn't been said in thousands of memes? They took everything people loved about the prior Zelda games and threw it out the window. They have little to no story to them, and other than the title, don't even feel like a normal Zelda game. Even Zelda 2, the side-scrolling black sheep of the franchise, feels more like your average Zelda game than any of these. The fact that the CDI had 3 separate Zelda games and all 3 are looked at as failures really speaks volumes. It is partially because of this that Nintendo is super strict when it comes to teaming up with third parties to create games. Luckily, we have had Capcom, Grezzo, and Tantalus working on remakes and original games with Nintendo for the Zelda series, and thus we have everyone's favorite spin-off, Hyrule Warriors. Seeing that none of these games have a place on Nintendo's already controversial timeline is 100% proof that Nintendo just wants everyone to forget that these games tainted the otherwise almost perfect series.